Hey guys, yep, welcome to the first time I've made a YouTube video with sound, my voice. This is going to be a bit of a long, meandery one, just because it's an overview of everything, and if there's anything specifically people are interested in more detail, I can do another video or videos relating to that specific thing. So, yeah. This will basically just give you a quick overview of the overall process that I go through, and yeah, we'll see if there's enough interest. I might do some more, might not, who knows. So yeah, I mean, to start, I guess like one of the main questions I get asked is where do I get my kind of like inspiration to do the art, and I always start really with just like looking at other people's stuff. So you know, like Pinterest is really good for just collating ideas and stuff from other people and finding shapes and stuff that you like. And often I'll you know, pick two or three things and pick a shape. Anything that Sid Mead has ever done is good, and you'll see obviously yeah, I'll reference that first piece that we'll look at. Sorry as well for my sniffling nose, I've got a cold. Apologies for that in advance. But yeah, yeah, just building references and you know, building up a taste for things that you like. So often this is where I'll start. I'll start in Pinterest, and yeah, it will be something as simple as like, oh, I like the corner of that, you know, like I like that bevel, or you know, I like the, you know, say like the top heavy feeling of that, or whatever. The first piece we'll look at is actually specifically taken from a specific drawing by Sid Mead, so that's slightly different, but yeah, on the most part it's drawing inspiration from places like this, and other artists and stuff. So yeah, let's get started on the first bit. I will preface this with saying that I only started doing anything to do with 3D about 9 months ago, April, how long ago that was. So loads of bad habits in here, I'm sure, so feel free to point those out. None of this is designed to work in 3D for animation or anything like that. It's purely for 2D artwork. So the typography and yeah, the general practice of the kind of, you know, the working practice of using Blender is probably yeah, probably quite bad. So don't take any of this as gospel. There may well be quicker and easier ways to do it, but yeah, these are just my current techniques. I'm sure they'll change as I learn more about the software. But yeah, so to start, so this is the last thing that I posted. It's a sort of Sid Mead inspired cyberpunk corner of a street, I guess. Started off as a very simple section of a wall with one of these sections here, and yeah, I enjoyed sort of the yeah, the act of making, you know, making these sections. So I thought, well, I'll take it a little bit further, and then decided to duplicate the image. Yeah, and then yeah, just turned it into a corner and added kind of lots of details and stuff like that to make it feel like it was, yeah, more lived in. But there were probably less details here than you might think. I mean, it's all mostly kind of made of, you know, actually quite a small number of blocks that have been duplicated a lot. So one of the kind of elements would be, yeah, something like this, which then dragged out, turned into the this tunnel area here, but that's just a duplicate of one of the other sections. These panels here, these are panels from a Frank Lloyd Wright house, designed house that were then used in Deckard's apartment in Blade Runner, and I thought it would be fun to just make those, just because they're interesting looking and they're quite useful for just adding kind of random detail into things. So for stuff like this section here and this section, that's exactly the same section, but behind it is one of these tiles, and just doing that, bringing it in and changing how far forward and backwards it is, will change the shape. So little tricks like that really help sort of make things look like they've been modelled in a kind of enlightened, interesting way, but in actuality it's just sort of, okay, that looks that's good there, so we'll leave it there or whatever. The other elements of this would be the lamppost, which is also taken from the original Sid Me drawing, and this section here. The overpass, it's literally just a box, very, very simple, and yeah, just dragged one end out. Obviously behind the model there's no detail at all, because again, knowing what our angle is and setting that up early means that I don't have to add detail where I don't necessarily need it. So yeah, from a model point of view, there isn't anything particularly complicated going on. Like, it takes a little bit of time, but then again, there's a lot of a lot of copy and paste. Once you've made this simple section, then it's a case of, I use these are made via a plugin, which is called Tube Tools, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but this plugin is absolutely brilliant. It allows me to pick two faces in a model and add kind of piping and tubing that way, and then down here on the left I'm able to kind of control the size and the location of it. My computer's running incredibly slowly, so I've got a few projects open. Then that saves itself as a, look at that, absolute art. That saves itself as its own model, so I can delete those accordingly. But they're all individual. So yeah, it's just a case of doing enough of that it started to feel it started to feel like there was detail there, but there's very little of it is in the grand scheme of it is individually placed. The only shading really that I did, it's all, you can see in the materials section for most of these. There's only 3 materials. Kind of one that I went into the that I did some actual kind of texture work in, node-based texture work in for the windows, but again, that's very simple, and yeah, the rest is just 2 slightly different shades of grey just to give it a little bit of life. And you can do that as much as you want, really. Like, it's very simple to change those colours, because the way that I would do it is go to select up here and then select random, and then change these random ones to a slightly different colour that I can then add. But yeah, I do this on some projects. It gives you a sort of Aztecing kind of Star Trek Enterprise feel to some of it. I don't always use it, but it's one quick technique that works quite well. Neon signs, obviously, absolutely ripped off Ian Hubert. His brilliant neon tutorial was great. Somebody asked me how you do text in Japanese. I think you just need a font that is a Japanese font, and then it will allow you to copy and paste. Now, somebody else has pointed out that the Japanese here is wrong, and that doesn't say what it's supposed to say. I don't know whether I accidentally deleted a letter off the end or whether Google was wrong. I will change that probably, but kind of adds a little bit of charm for me, a bit of a story. Yeah, and with the Pepsi sign and stuff, that's just a font that I downloaded from defont.com. There's logos. I did find that they had to be a specific format of font to work in Blender. So if you can't get that to work straight away, just double check that I think it's a TTF font. Because otherwise, yeah, I didn't seem to be able to get that to load, but somebody else might have more information on that. Yeah, and that's basically the process. I didn't do a time lapse. It seems like every single time I do a time lapse, the model ends up being rubbish. So I didn't do a time lapse for this, and by the time I get to a point with the model that I'm happy with it, it's not too late So I will do my best to try and do a time lapse at some point. So apologies for that. Other individual bits are the pillars, so you can see how they're made fairly simply. Yeah, so from a model point of view, fairly straightforward. Obviously, things like scale, like in terms of creating scale, making things feel big and detailed, I just tend to do a lot of copy and pasting. I find that if I zoom out to a certain point and the model looks detailed enough, I'm like, okay, well that's probably the size of my canvas, and then I can, copy and paste and drag bits around until they feel like, they have life to them. Obviously, simple things like beveling edges makes a huge, can make a huge difference. Something that, if you look at a lot of kind of Sid Mead's work, that he does a very specific style of kind of edge beveling, but things like this, it just feels sort of inherently sci-fi to me, those angles. And yeah, I mean, very, very small bevels obviously can make a big difference to making something feel like it's not kind of perfectly made in a render engine. What else is going on here? So obviously, yeah, the next thing really would be the lighting, and this is perhaps the one place where I feel like I have a slight advantage, because my day job is I'm a cinematographer, so I'm in charge of the kind of lighting on films and adverts and stuff. So understanding lighting has been incredibly helpful, because it just means that I can start lighting early on and then know where I do not need to add lots of extra detail. So I knew in the lighting process for this that this under area here was going to be largely dark, so I didn't need to add boatloads of detail that I didn't need. And I knew that for these areas here where there's these lampposts are shining a light onto the building, I knew that they would be quite crucial in terms of like adding extra detail and that kind of thing. So the earlier that you can do that, the better. And generally, like, one of the things that I see people kind of miss a lot when they're doing these kind of things is the lighting will be quite flat, and it's incredible how much you can gain from things, having these hard lines across here. Just makes this kind of whole area seem a little bit more interesting. You see it a lot in anime stuff. It seems like a lot of anime stuff is very, very flatly lit from sort of behind camera, but what they'll do is have these big hard slashes of light over walls and stuff. And it's something that we do in film. It just makes things look a little bit more interesting, because you have these areas of dark and shadow. I think there's another one here. And the other thing is, I always tend to light towards where the camera is rather than from behind the camera, and that's something again that we absolutely do in film. There's nothing worse than, sorry, just burping at you there. There's nothing worse than having a light, behind camera. There are ways that you can work with that and make it look great, but it's certainly harder. And I'm always looking for ways that I can, put my lights, upstage pointing down, because just think about the way that light works with the shapes and stuff. Like, having those shadows come towards you just seems more interesting, and it paints the shadows in rather than just taking them out by having a really flat light from behind camera. So in this scene, I mean, there isn't a huge amount going on. These lampposts, there's obviously these panels here, which are pointing, pointing into here. I think there's one over here as well, giving us that. And then the other thing really is a trick that I haven't seen done anywhere else to my knowledge, but it might well be a technique that other people use, is to give this sort of gradient on the sky. Behind the model is, you might have seen, is this big blue background, which is just a box basically. And what I'll often do with that is it allows me to put another bigger light. Sorry, this seems actually quite too big really. It allows me to put another bigger light higher up and point it down to give me a kind of light gradient on the background. Now I could do that later on when I do the painting stage of it, but it's kind of nice just to have it to work with. It means I don't have to cut around the shape with a drawing app or whatever. It means I get a more natural fall off of the light. And this thing here, I don't often do this, but on this model I sort of had to, just because of the sizes and the shapes of everything. I mean, basically in film terms this would be a flag, what we call a flag or a cutter, and I'm basically using it to take the light off the top of the model, because without this I was getting very, very kind of bright red light over the top of the model, and it wasn't particularly appealing. You probably see if I delete this, you see these background areas here, they start looking very red. So I essentially use that to yeah, you can see that really coming through now, which actually kind of looks a little bit interesting here. I didn't like it at the time, but maybe that was a mistake, I don't know. So I'll put that back in, but yeah, that I find basically just being able to use very similar tools to those that I would use in film, but just on a much bigger scale, very, very useful. And you always remember that you can yeah, you can do these tricks and things with your lighting. But yeah, just generally trying to add shape. I mean, this I did something very similar with this model here, if I can get to it. So this is another scene that I did a few weeks ago, and all the principles are basically exactly the same, just starting with a quite simple shape like this. And I built that. I thought, oh, it looks interesting. Added a little bit of detail, but not huge amounts. And I was looking at it, it wasn't feeling detailed enough. And then I decided to just duplicate that and then spin it on its head, and then I created this top section here, which just made it kind of feel a bit more interesting. And then I just took these other shapes from other models that I had. So I'd already built I'd done some buildings and stuff, so from another model, and I just copied and pasted those in. These pipes, they were taken from another model that I did, that I've recycled loads and loads, because I spent about 3 hours making pipes. And yeah, just occasionally I'll steal those and put them in. I mean, as you can see, the other side of the model that isn't on camera is totally devoid of any detail. There's much less detail over here, and again, these are just copy and paste, so didn't really need to do a massive amount of work to get to this section. And I again just chose my camera angle quite early on, and knew what was going to be in the shot, so I wasn't having to add things. I mean, these little spaceships are just sections from another model. So this is largely kit bash. I mean, it's kit bash from stuff that I've just accumulated over the last 9 months, but yeah, there isn't necessarily like loads of like unique modeling going on here. One thing that's slightly different about this, I guess, would be with the camera. This camera's at a much longer focal length, and again, some of you might already know all of this stuff, but for those who don't, I find kind of photographing stuff like big sci-fi buildings, the kind of stuff that I do, always feels bigger and more realistic to me if it's taken on from the perspective of a long lens. If you imagine photographing the Burj Khalifa, you'd probably have to, if you wanted to photograph the top of the Burj Khalifa from the ground, you'd have to zoom in quite far, and that gives you this effect of compression between kind of the foreground and the background. It makes everything feel compressed, and the human eye is very good at knowing the difference between whether a camera is close or far away from an object, and for me, if things should be really big, then we should probably be quite far away from them, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see them. So that's a fairly straightforward technique. I mean, lots of artists use it. I mean, Paul Chatterson is sort of the god of this. His work is in terms of scale, is absolutely exceptional. Likewise on this, I think it's a little bit more simple than the other one. I think I've got a couple of panels. I always tend to use panels just so I can increase the size of them. What I've done here slightly differently, but using the same sort of technique, is this kind of slash across the front of the model here with a kind of red light, makes it feel like a sunset. Now maybe that light should probably be over here as well, but it's sci-fi, guys. It's fine. I'm not following any rules whatsoever when it comes to real life physics. As long as it doesn't feel too weird to the eye. I don't know, maybe I'll look back at this in a year and be like, oh, it's awful. I think so for this scene in terms of the lights, what have we got? So yeah, we have this at the front, which was giving us that kind of red feel, and I think I must have something soft over the top or below. Yeah, something over the top and below. I don't know what they're doing. Yeah, the one below isn't doing anything. I can delete that. So yeah, this is just giving my scene a general sort of lift. This would be if you know, if we're shooting a film in a studio, this would be the equivalent of a space light. You know, which just sort of gives us a flat kind of feel. And I think, you know, if you're working on your scene from scratch, it's a good place to start putting one of these lights in, because it just gives you a sort of general look that is easy to work with, and kind of starts baking in the feel of kind of shadows and stuff. I will say that most of my models are all done in cycles, just because the way light behaves inside. I don't know much about render engines, but the way the light works in cycles seems to be much more close to real life. Obviously, it's a bit trickier to work in, and you know, obviously sample sizes and stuff like that take much longer. But yeah, that's I find it much easier to work with. If I was to change this to EV, I mean, absolutely no idea what's going on there. Yeah, so yeah, I tend to work in cycles. Problem is, if you start working in cycles, if you go down that road, when you change to EV later on, it becomes harder and harder to switch between the two. So I don't do it for all my models. Sometimes if I want to do kind of really intense volumetrics, then I'll have to go for EV. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely works absolutely fine for what I need it for. Yeah, I seem to remember the final render of this was a little bit brighter, but maybe that's not the case. But so you can see, I'll put up on screen the final render after it had been through, you know, Procreate and stuff. So yeah, that's that for that model, and I guess the only other one that might be worth showing you would be this was another part of the same commission. Now this one took ages and was an absolute nightmare, because it was just such a kind of complicated such a complicated model, and as you can see, there's just junk just all over this, because there are so many objects. I mean, if we look at the objects here, this is a real good example of like how not to use Blender if you want a job. If I do it as a job, I mean, you can see, I mean, there's 1,300 cubes. How many cylinders have we got? We've got another 1,000 cylinders, and probably the same in terms of 1,100 planes. So this is the result of not being able to become happy with a model early on, and just copying and pasting until you have just an insane amount of detail that you don't need, because there's loads of stuff here that is just wasted. You know, I've tried my best to do. I mean, this is all array modifiers and stuff. This kind of model that's used throughout this building is part of an old model I made for the NASA crawler, and I was really struggling with this model, and I was like going through my old projects and trying to find something that would work, and then I liked the pipes around the edges of it, so I was like, okay, well, that kind of like a building, and I'd already made these sections. But again, this model probably started life, I think it started life with these little feet, which were covered in these tiles that, again, I used in the other model. And I was like, okay, well, you know, we'll take this section. I think I'd taken this from an older model as well. And then I was like, okay, well, if we put two of these together, it looks like, you know, pillars, and then, you know, put a building there, and then I wasn't happy with the detail of the building. So I was like, well, if we put two next to each other, there'll be more. And I was like, well, if you do four, then they become pillars in themselves. and then double that up, and then you've got like an even kind of wider building. And at this point, obviously the object numbers are going up just into insane numbers. So this is probably the worst example I have of like, well, maybe the best example I have of just bad Blender practice. I'll try and show you it in, for some reason it's in, yeah, I'll try and show you it rendered, but we'll see how the computer handles it. Computer-wise, I don't really know anything about computers, but I do have a fairly decent computer. I just gave my friend some money and he built it. So I know it's got a 1080 graphics card in it, and an i5, I think. So it's not insane. It's probably a little bit outdated now, but yeah, it's kind of pushing it to the limit, I think. Thankfully, I'm not doing any animation. Yeah, you can see here the problem with, again, not only did I make this scene just super detailed for no reason really, I also decided to add volumetrics to it just to really seal the deal with sending my computer to an early grave. So yeah, you can see kind of the effect of that is kind of taking out some of these details. Light-wise, doing the same trick really. I've got a light panel here giving me this kind of sunset feel, you know, that's just hitting one side of the building. It's something you see sometimes in buildings because obviously they'll be surrounded by other buildings, and you know the sunset may only catch the top of a building or the sunrise. So yeah, and again, lighting towards the camera and then letting this left side kind of fall off into darkness. And again, you'll see it all the time in films. You know, allowing something that's very in vogue at the moment in music videos and commercials is to just let this side of the, of whatever you're shooting kind of fall off into darkness more. And in film, maybe you bounce a little bit of light back into it, and thankfully the scene itself is sort of doing that, and that's giving us this effect. But yeah, obviously I also am rendering these out in 4K, so I've got loads to work with in Procreate. And yeah, it's probably about as far as you can push a model. So I wouldn't recommend going down this route. I am super happy with this. Like I was glad I kind of got there, and it feels like it's a lived-in space. But yeah, this one did take. This is probably the longest I've spent on a model. Sort of beginning to end, probably about 9 hours. Normally I can do most of them within 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours, if I've got an idea I like, and because what I'll start with no plan whatsoever, and if I eventually kind of as I go through the model, like normally what happens is I go, oh okay, that looks like something else, that looks like a building, or it looks like a spaceship, or whatever, and then I'll go from there. Yeah, so that's, I guess, covers off yeah, a reasonable amount in terms of like the main processes that I go through. It's a little bit rambly. I apologize for that, but that's exactly how I approach the model making as well. It's all a bit random. Like I'll jump between, because the lighting, I'll have to jump from a bit of the model to a bit of the lighting, because then the lighting will change how the model looks, and I'll have to focus on different parts of that, and then I'll be like unhappy with that after a while, and I'll be like, oh, I need to add some volumetrics, some fog, and then that'll look okay in Eevee, but then look rubbish in cycles, and yeah, it's a bit of a sort of mad process without any logic. And to be honest, like, because I started this without really learning anything officially, I did the Blender Guru donut, and then I kind of just got on with it and learned loads of bad habits. So yeah, I think that kind of slightly mad, uneducated approach is what's allowed me to sort of do these kind of hyper detailed things, because you can't really break the rules if you don't know them. So yeah, I'm very aware that if I ever got hired to design anything for a video game or something like that, then I'd really have to learn from scratch. But for 2D art, it works absolutely fine. So yeah, I guess I'll go through some stuff about Procreate, and then like the final image editing. But yeah, that's it, I guess, for the Blender stuff. If you've got any questions about specific things, then do yeah, fire me a message or put it in the comments. I've got no desire to do this really as a job. I've got a job that I love, so your your feedback is absolutely welcome in terms of like making my work process quicker and easier. But yeah, I'm not going to be losing sleep over people criticizing my Blender skill, because your hate only feeds me. But yeah, thank you guys from Reddit. Like everyone has been super lovely, and the community is amazing. The Discord's amazing. The feedback's always been, 99.9% of it's been really lovely. And yeah, a year ago I was just a fan of concept art, and now I get to do it, and yeah, I can't draw, so that's all down to Blender and the community and the tutorials. So yeah, I can't really thank everyone enough for that. It's been a lovely hobby to have. And hopefully, in the future, if you got any other questions, I'll be able to make videos about that. But like I say, I'm not out to become YouTube famous or turn this into a job or anything like that. So it's just, if this stays as a small group of people who are interested in this particular kind of art, then that's great. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. And yeah, do let me know if there's anything else that you want to see me make. I'll try and get some time lapses up, because I know people have asked for that. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.